I've been pretty compelled by people who say we need to have more of a culture of trade schools in America, like they do in some European countries. Like there are some European countries where it's way more normal to go to a trade school and just to know you're the kind of person that's going to do better at trade school. Whereas here we've identified going to a 4-year college as this sort of golden pill that's going to cure everything, when it's not the right solution for a lot of people.
Correct. And there's a lot. I mean, I alluded to this, but this is a big deal. We were talking about the ways in which identity politics, both parties basically divest from substantive class politics. What liberals did, part of what liberals did was to say, okay, we're supposed to care about Black people. That's our cohort. Okay, we're supposed to care about Latinos. We're supposed to care about all the diverse people. All right. Okay. So we got to say something that addresses all of this disparity, all of the crap that's going on in the 90s, the drug war, all of this stuff. We got to say something, right? Okay, so what we're going to say is that the reason all of this stuff exists is because y'all didn't go to college. That has been the prevailing narrative forever. Instead of asking our elected officials to actually deal with the mess that they made with deindustrializing the workforce and getting rid of low-wage labor and the fact of automation, meaning that some jobs are just not going to come back, and saying, okay, well, because we believe in the value of human beings, we're going to create a social safety net that exists in places like Scandinavia where everyone has a decent ability to live, right? The fact that we innovated and built robots means that, hey, we don't have to do as much work, and this should be a good thing. That's the Jetsons future we were all supposed to be aiming for, instead of moralizing and saying, you don't deserve to live in a house unless you're laboring for 40 hours a week, which is the world we live in now. Instead, they said, okay, no, we're going to blame it all on people's individual ability to get an education, or desire to get an education, or ability to get an education. And so to distract you from the extent to which these are policy choices that are being made at a very high level so that very wealthy people can benefit themselves. Right. And so now we've had many, many, many decades of this kind of cultivated elitism that comes from not people wanting to say, I'm better than an electrician, I'm better than a plumber, but because the message from on high, from all of the people who everyone loves, the Obamas and everyone, has been education is it. Education is it. And liberals love a technocracy. They love a technocrat. They love a Barack Obama. They love an Elizabeth Warren who says, I'm very smart and I went to the right schools and therefore I know how to solve all the world's problems, as though poverty exists because someone just hasn't thought it through with their McKinsey brain hard enough. No, these are policy choices that are being made by people who very much benefit from poverty existing, right? Who very much benefit from there being an excess labor market, as we've seen now during COVID, where all of these corporations are all like crying boo boo hoo hoo because their people were empowered enough to actually demand a living wage, when we haven't had a minimum wage raise for the longest period in American history since the minimum wage was invented in 1938. That's where we are. And yet we have all of these like Bloomberg media articles saying, oh, it's a disaster that workers have enough power and leverage because of the stimulus checks to actually demand the wages they should have been getting for a long time if we had inflation-adjusted wages. So that's all to say, I agree with you that we are in this problem with this kind of elite education being the be-all end-all solve, that it isn't. Mm-hmm. But it's not because of just a random left-wing elitism like some people will argue. It's because that is the messaging that has been used to cover for the disastrous economic policies that both corporate parties have been pursuing for the last 30 years. And then there's obviously nothing wrong with college. I personally believe everyone should have the right to go to college because we benefit from a well-educated workforce. We don't need people to labor as much because of automation as we used to. And I think it's a wonderful time to be spending in your life, educating the public, getting to know people who are different from you, having a sense of national solidarity, getting to know your fellow man. I think college is a wonderful experience and we can afford for everyone to do it. And we should have that ability for everyone if they want it. But I also don't think that we should believe, like buy into the notion that that is the dividing line between the rich and the poor. Because I'm telling you, these Walton kids and these, Biden kids and all of these elite kids who are running around being very public fail sons are not some elite savants who deserved to get into Wharton and all the schools that their parents have paid for them to get into. And it's not a meritocracy. It's just not.
So you mentioned the minimum wage. And so I'm going to channel my friend who owns a business in New York City. He owns a restaurant and a comedy club. And he says, he tells me, it makes me so angry when people just blithely talk about a minimum wage increase, because what that is a law that I have to pay other people more, and look at my balance sheet, which is very narrow, narrow profit margins, highly competitive industry. And they're telling me I have to pay more to each employee, which means practically I need to fire someone. And why not just have a wage subsidy? If the government is just, why can't the government use taxpayer money to directly pay my workers $1 extra for every $15 I pay them, so that it doesn't come out of my pocket?
Well, I support a number of wage subsidies, one of which is called Medicare for All. Since your small business owner friend will tell you that the number one expense for most business owners is healthcare. I'm a small business owner. I have exactly one employee at my podcast, right? And I can vouch for the fact that healthcare is the biggest expense by far. So instead of all of me paying my contribution to my healthcare, the employer paying the other half of the contribution of the employee's money to healthcare, we all know that same amount of money, less, going straight to the government for an administered healthcare plan that doesn't go through the middleman of these insurance industries who have an enormous bureaucracy that's designed not to help you get better or to get care, but to come up with ways to deny you treatment when you're at one of the hardest moments in your life. That's a good way to have a subsidy. Another one is to talk about a jobs program, which was something on the left's agenda, a job guarantee, so that we have a place. If you can't pay equitable wages, okay, well, you're the person you want to employ should also have the opportunity to go and work somewhere where they can earn a $15 minimum wage. One thing I will give Joe Biden credit for is that all federal employees now at least have a $15 minimum wage, and contractors have a $15 minimum wage. So maybe your friend isn't able to pay his or her employees a living wage. Okay. I don't think that means that employee deserves to be exploited. I think that means that they should be able to find a job on the job market that will pay them that. And if that means that your employee...
He pays them a living wage. He pays them what waiters and get paid in Greenwich Village.
The Coleman, that's not a living wage. And I don't mean this isn't your friend. I'm not saying your friend's a bad person. But the reality is, before we had a minimum wage, we also didn't have child labor laws. We also didn't have 40-hour week. We had all of these innovations around the New Deal because we were living in a hellscape where we were sending 9-year-olds down chimneys and they were dying at 25 of the black lung. We had no workplace protections. We had no nothing. So unless the argument is, I just don't believe in the minimum wage and we should just have a libertarian hellscape. I mean, God bless you.
The argument is minimum wage versus wage subsidy. One forces me as a business owner to bear the cost of, you want to make the world a better place, but you're ordering me to allocate money in my business differently. And you're forcing me essentially to fire someone in many cases because you think you're making the world a better place, as opposed to a wage subsidy, which does the same thing, but puts the responsibility on the government.
Well, Coleman, let me ask you this hypothetical. If I'm able to run my business, if I'm able to find someone who's willing to edit my podcast for $1 an hour, let's say they're willing to do that because they're a non-documented immigrant who isn't able to get a job over the table. Let's say it's because they are under immense financial pressure because they have a student loan debt or some other kind of debt that's come due. And they're facing eviction and they have a family or they have medical bills. Let's say whatever constraints they're under, they're willing to do it for an exploitative price when market is at least, let's say, $50 an hour for that job.
For a non-immigrant.
For someone who had the ability to get a different, to go elsewhere, to shop on the marketplace and take their labor elsewhere. I would argue that the only way I get that person to work for me below market value is because the system itself is broken, right? And this is where I think your mom was right about Marx. I'm sorry.
I'm not sure I totally understand the hypothetical because, if it's an immigrant working for you at a low wage, but it's below market for maybe what a native worker would demand, but it's market for for immigrant labor
No,
in the industry?
The market is artificially created by constraints of a system that we designed. These things aren't natural law. The reality is so I don't want to know that if I want to get into this whole like profit as wage theft right now, since we're kind of probably nearing the end of our time together. But the reality is, if I'm able to exploit somebody because they don't have options, if I take that ability away.
I worry you're preloading the argument by describing it as exploitation rather than employment.
Well, this is why we have to do labor profit is wage theft.
Yeah.
This is why we have to do that. That's why we always have to do that dance. And I know that, look, I am not some great Marx scholar. I don't know that I've read Marx outside the context of some like sophomore college class. You know, I'm not that person.
He's really hard to read.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking over at my bookshelf because there's many unopened books over there. There's many books that I got like 3 words in. But here's the basic gist as I understand it. I'm sorry, all the Marxist scholars who I'm sure going to tell me that I've oversimplified this. But if I am a business owner and I build my business's tables, the reason I'm a business owner, I come to this with capital. I have the capital to buy the wood that is going to go into the tables, right? That's how I'm the business owner. How I got the capital, it's an interesting question. No one ever goes back that far. And that's a really important conversation to have. But I have capital. Let's say it takes $5 of wood for me to build every table. And once the table is built, I can sell it for $10. Okay. That means that's $5 of profit. Somebody built that table, right? And the person who built that table through their labor turned a $5 pile of wood into a $10 table, right? It's worth $10 only because of their labor turned that $5 wood into a $10 table. Without them, I still just have a $5 pile of wood, right?
Yeah, this is the labor theory of value, right?
Correct. So for me to profit, and the whole reason I'm in this, right, is because I want to profit. For me to profit, I have to take some portion of that $5. And that is what one might call exploitation. Because in a world where the laborer happened to have the $5 for the wood to begin with, they would be able to completely recoup the benefits of their labor.
So all managers and owners could be erased from the earth and the production would stay the same.
No, the issue is whether or not the people who are able to front capital should be the ones that are deciding who gets what cut of the labor, as opposed to these other models that the left talks about, like employee ownership, where there are more collaborative decisions being made that aren't based on who just happened to come in with a capital to begin with, right? Because the reason that we have all of these jobs that got offshored, for instance, is because what's good for the corporate owner at the top in terms of marginally increasing profit by 1 cent by making a Malaysian child build your sneakers or whatever is not what the decision making would be of the laborer in Detroit, who doesn't really care about making 1 more cent profit on their dividend. They care about the shop staying local, their ability to drive to work, their ability to keep their job and keep their community intact. And we have these perverse incentives that are happening all over the place because we have a system that is able to be dictated by the owners of capital, who, I got to say, often came to that capital in dishonest ways that have nothing to do with their own work or ingenuity. It's inheritance, it's legacies of slavery or colonialism or exploitation. And I know I'm losing people now saying these words, but it is just a historical reality of the situation. People weren't just bestowed with random amounts of money according to merit upon birth. I wish that's the way the world was, but it's not.
What is your model? Is there a company you can point to that's doing it this way that you think is doing a great job that other companies should emulate?
So employee ownership is a huge thing. And I would recommend you maybe have, if you haven't already, Professor Richard Wolff on the program. I would be happy to put you two in touch, and he would do a much better job at this than I am. He's a Marxist economist and a really wonderful speaker. But Costco, for instance, is an example of an employer ownership model where these kinds of distribution decisions are being made by a collective. I think the Packers,
like Costco has always been touted as having like a great worker culture and so forth. But I'm also, is it the democratic socialist end goal to see, Walmart and Amazon just all looking like Costco? Would that be like a ball in the net? Or my suspicion is there would be some still very deep and fundamental critiques of even that system, right?
Well, no. I mean, I think the idea would be if if business decisions were being made by an employee-owned model, that many, if not all, of the vagaries of companies like Amazon would cease to exist because the people who are designing how the company works would be changing them.